Hey there, friends, and welcome to episode 236 of Just the Zoo of Us. This week, I am joined by a corvid scientist to review the clever little goths rummaging through a trash can near you, American crows. We discuss the twists and turns of a career in science, what crows can learn from funerals, how to tell a crow from a raven, and lessons in crucial skills like cheeto thievery and pizza crust gardening. Before we get into the episode, a really quick housekeeping note. There is still time to send in animal questions from any curious kids for our upcoming episode with my own special young scientist. So please do email in any kids' animal questions to ellen@justthezooofus.com, and please include Isaac in the subject line. That is spelled ISAAC. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the episode. Just the Zoo of Us presents American Crows with Dr. Kaeli Swift. Everybody, it's Ellen Weatherford. I'm here with Just the Zoo of Us, your favorite animal review podcast, and I'm so thrilled this week to talk to a brand new friend for many of you, Dr. Kaeli Swift. Hello, say hi.
Hi, Ellen. Oh, am I supposed to say hi, or is that people saying hi to me?
If you listen really closely, you'll hear all over the world, but staggered because everyone's going to listen at different times. You'll just periodically throughout the day hear hi.
Get a little hi, yeah.
And Kaeli, what are your pronouns real quick?
She, her.
Thank you so much. And I'm thrilled to talk to you because you have, I think, one of the most fascinating jobs that I've ever heard of, and get to study and work with not just a fascinating animal, but a fascinating and so accessible animal because they're everywhere. I'm looking at one right now. Actually, I'm looking out my window and they're just out there around. So it's going to be, something that I think a lot of people can relate to. A lot of people can sort of apply to their own daily life. Before we talk about our cool animal for today, let's get to know you a little bit. Kaeli, can you let our friends listening know, what is the work that you do with these really cool animals?
So that is a good question. Right now, I am a postdoc working at the University of Washington, and I actually don't work with crows right now. I'm working with a different kind of bird called the Tinian monarch, which is not a butterfly. A lot of people hear that and they think I have completely pivoted to something totally different, which is butterflies, but I'm still working with birds. I think one of the things about science that's both really wonderful but also surprising to people is when you choose to go on to get an advanced degree. A lot of times people think that how you spent that time is then what you get to or choose to do for the rest of your career. For a lot of folks, that's not the case, including myself. In my case, it's not by choice. It was just kind of how it has worked out in this moment. But when people ask me, what is your identity as a scientist, right? That has become sort of an evolving question, because on the one hand, I absolutely identify as a corvid scientist. That's still what I spend most of my, when I'm not focused on my job, what I spend most of my free time, my free science, so to speak, thinking about. And it's definitely the group of animals that I've dedicated the most of my life's work to. But I do want to just let audience members know that that's not what I work on right in this moment. And I just think it's a good example. It's good to know that both just so that people understand who I am better, but also to appreciate the often non-linear nature of a life in the sciences and a life in academia. And some people are fortunate to have that really linear path, but not everybody does, and that's okay too.
Much like science itself, constantly changing in a fluid state.
Yes, exactly. And one of the really, good benefits of that is it helps you sort of think about questions and understand the world from a little bit broader perspective, right? When you stay in your single expertise, obviously that's a really good way to get really, really good at that one thing. But the drawback is sometimes you miss out on learning different techniques, learning different taxa, right? That maybe down the road you could bring back into working once again with your like specialty animal if you get to do that. But it's a nice way to sort of remind yourself that, oh, there's actually lots of really wonderful things in the world. And I think that's a really important component of this path.
Have you gotten to apply what you know about corvids now in this work with this other... I just looked up a Tinian monarch. It's so cute.
They're so cute.
Very adorable little bird. Have you gotten to kind of like apply what you know about corvids or what you learned through working with corvids to this work on this new bird?
I'm mostly applying the skills that I learned as part of my training as a scientist. The work that I'm doing with monarchs is not behavioral work like what I was doing with the crows. What I spent my PhD working on is crow funerals, how crows respond to other dead crows. And one of the most common questions I get from non-professional scientists is, how do you make a job out of that? Like, who's going to pay you a sustainable living to like learn about these obscure crow behaviors? And the answer to that question is that that's actually not what I got trained to do as a graduate student. That's how it manifested. But when you go to school, when you decide that you want to go to school for a really, really long time to get a more advanced degree, whether that's a master's or a PhD, you're going to have a focus, and it's going to be this really niche question that like you and a couple other people maybe in the world have ever asked or are really looking into on that level.
You can't just type in the question and then Reddit into Google and
right.
like get a whole thread.
Exactly. You are now the person generating those would-be Reddit headlines because you are the person contributing to these novel discoveries, right? And so while it's true that like that individual project's going to be this really like niche thing, what you're actually getting trained to do is be a scientist and learn how to ask questions and learn how to design experiments and collect data. And so when I graduated, I wasn't expecting to land a permanent position right away as crow funeral expert, because it's true, that's a very hard thing to get funding for. But I was prepared to study birds in this broad way. And so that was the position that came to my desk first. And like most people in this world, I got bills to pay. I got a life to support.
Get that bag.
Yep, exactly.
Secure the bag.
So I found myself now, to my surprise, working on a really remote island in the Pacific called Tinian, where I'm studying this very small, as you say, very cute songbird that exists only on this one island, actually. So it's a very special bird. It's a naturally rare bird because it has this really limited range. And like the crow, it is an incredibly charismatic and sassy bird. So I get to share that sort of component of it where they have that sort of streak in their personality that I really adore. I actually remember I have this very vivid memory of when I was in graduate school, I was working on my crow funeral experiments. I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with the Seattle area, but I was on Capitol Hill, which is this very busy part of the city, very walkable. So lots of people out. It was like a beautiful summer day, and I'm running one of my experiments, which in that moment consisted of me with a dead taxidermied squirrel, and it was out on the sidewalk, and I was recording how often and how quickly the crows would come down and like check out this squirrel, because I wanted to compare how crows responded to dead crows to compare that to a more typical food item, something that they might scavenge. Because that was one of the questions. It was like, are crows interested in dead crows? Because they're just treating them like a scavenging opportunity, like any other dead thing that they would be happy to eat. So I needed to do that experiment. Anyway, so I'm out there, I got my clipboard, I got my tripod, my dead squirrel, and I'm like in this because I'm standing there with this camera stuff, like I'm conspicuous, right? I'm very visible. And people would come up to me and kind of ask what I'm doing, sometimes excitedly, sometimes very suspiciously. And so I had this older couple, and they were clearly on their way back from the grocery store. It was like very cute. They had their little totes.
Oh.
And I was like, I hope I get there.
Me and who?
Yeah. And they were like, oh, what are you doing? So I explained to them, my whole experiment. And in general, my experience was that older folks were, especially older women, were so excited because that demographic tends to be like, they've arrived at birding, right?
Yes, this is a stage in your life where you care a lot about birds.
So like bird science, woman in science, like there's just a lot of things there that really would often please them.
You're playing the hits.
Yes, exactly. So I'm like telling them all about my experiment. I'm so excited. And their reception was kind of cool. I was a little surprised. They weren't really like vibing in the way that I expected. And then they just kind of look at each other and then look back at me. And they say, okay, so, what do your parents think of what you're doing? I was just like, wow, I just spun you this whole yarn about how I'm like getting my doctorate. And your response is to be really disappointed.
They're like disappointed for your parents.
For my parents. They're like, wow, gosh, you're the problems. I guess you're the disappointing child in the family. Your crazy crow work. Yeah. And so, like I say, not everybody understands that, when you're going to school for these really niche topics, what you're actually coming out of that experience with, besides just being a huge nerd, in something that like a few other people in the world are going to be able to nerd out as hard as you, is this broader training that then allows you to potentially diversify after school and pursue a lot of different careers. So 15 minutes in, that is my very long-winded answer to trying to explain what I study.
I feel like it lands so squarely in the center of a Venn diagram where the sections would be like bird nerds, science nerds, and goths, where like it's just right in the middle.
Yeah.
Were you a bird nerd kid or possibly a goth kid?
I was not a goth kid. So I was a bird nerd kid, but not in the way that I think people envision based on my current career. Because what I really was a kid who struggled immensely with school. I have ADHD, although at that time they called it just ADD. I'm dyslexic. And so school was horrible for most of my early years. It was not a place that I felt comfortable. It was failing a lot of classes. It was, seeing counselors. It was being held back grades. So I did not think of myself as a nerd because to me, nerds were really academically inclined. They were really smart. And I didn't think of myself as a smart kid because I performed so poorly in school. But I found a lot of refuge in animals. And once I learned how to read, which took a while, once I learned how to read, I loved to read books about animals and wolves, actually, in particular. And then my grandma loved birds, and she wasn't like an Audubon birder. She just was somebody who had a bird feeder and a guide that she bought at a bookstore one time. That's how far it went.
That's how it starts. That's how they get you.
But that's how it starts, right? Yeah. So I loved to crack open those books and try and figure out what the birds at the feeder were. But that was as far as it went. I didn't know that, there were Audubon groups that you could go on field trips with. And my family was very supportive. They would, if we went on road trips or something and I was like, oh, can we go here? There's special birds. They would absolutely engage. And so then, because I come from a privileged background, I finally, in sort of late middle school, early high school, things started to come together for me academically. And I had reached sort of a threshold in maturity. And again, those support systems that I had and those resources that I had, that I could finally start figuring out, like, school clicked for me and I knew how to be successful in an environment that wasn't designed for someone like me. But I figured out what that looks like for me personally. But at that same time, I was a high school kid, and being into birds was not it in my community. In fact, I remember still my best friend to this day, her parents were really avid birders. And they would always have like cassette tapes of bird calls in the car, and we would just get in. And no, we thought that was so lame because we were like silly high school kids, right? I didn't see the vision. Tried to do the cool thing. I didn't see the vision. I had like pivoted, turned my back on my childhood. I was like, no, I'm not that like kid anymore. I'm cool. And I wasn't. I was not at all.
I am obsessed with the idea of getting into somebody's car.
Honda Civic. Yeah.
Like, pass me the aux. Hold on. I got a real banger. You gotta hear this one. And you turn on just bird calls.
Latest warbler calls. No, it was like, in retrospect, it was amazing. And I'm so disappointed in us that we didn't take more. But that's what it is to be a kid, right? Like you know, your parents try and you don't have the vision to understand. But it's okay. It's okay.
Let them cook. You gotta let them cook.
So then kind of all through high school, I was just sort of like, look at me. I'm fine. I can finally do school. I'm like getting B's and A's but I wasn't sort of nerding out so much on the wildlife thing until then I circled back. Kind of towards the end, I'm thinking about college, and I still, you don't shake ADHD. It is with you. It is your little pet that you have for your life. And so one of the questions as an ADHD person that you find yourself asking is like, all right, there is a whole world of career options, of ways to spend your day. What realistically captures your attention? Because that list is often short. And I recognized towards the end of high school that the answer was, in fact, still wildlife. That was really the only thing that I could seriously see myself. And I still didn't think of myself as like a scientist. I wanted to be a scientist, but I was like, I don't know. Can you really do that? I don't know if you can really do that.
Is that a real thing that real people do? Or is that just in movies?
Yeah, like, is that just like what really smart people do? But I wanted to try, and I knew, like, if I'm going to go to school, it's going to be a biology major, and like, yeah, let's try and make this happen. And for a moment, it was marine biology. I was really into cephalopods because obviously they're amazing and they're so cool.
How could you not? Yeah, based.
Yeah, as a behavior person. But then once I got into college, I went to a small liberal arts school called Willamette. And so, the biology program had a fairly limited number of faculty. And the main wildlife person, they were a bird person. That was the wildlife. And so once I got back into that space, I was like, yes, this is it. That's right. Young me actually knew so much more than I gave her credit for because she knew where my heart was. And I tried to turn my back on that for a little while, but I have come back around. And at the same time, I was thinking about, okay, so I like birds, but what are kind of the scientific questions that I like to ask? And it was and still is questions about behavior. And I am particularly interested in looking at intelligent animals, socially intelligent animals, and the way that complex social dynamics feeds back on cognitive development, right? So early 2000s, I'm in college, and it wasn't really until the 90s that work had been coming out about crows and about corvids and how smart they were, right? Because for a long time, we had such a chip on our shoulders about birds are bird brain, right? Who cares about birds from a cognitive standpoint?
And they're almost so common that you stop noticing them, right? You just ignore them because they're everywhere. But then once you actually stop to look at them, you're like, oh, this is incredibly sophisticated.
Yeah, well, the other problem is that bird brains are very different than mammalian brains. And one of the biggest differences is that if you picture a brain, you picture this squishy thing, right? It's got all those little ridges and stuff. Bird brains are smooth. And so the reason we have all those ridges is to create more surface area so we can have higher neuronal density. So we looked at these bird brains. We looked at the fact that they were smooth. the different organization. We just kind of assumed that that meant that they were more primitive. They weren't as sophisticated as a mammalian brain. But as it turns out, they actually have higher neuronal density, some of the birds. It's just a different way to do it. But they achieve a lot of the same results. And that's what we see when we studied more about corvids and parrots. But anyway, so all of that information was like very fresh in the early 2000s. And so I'm like reading about this, relearning my love of birds. And those came together in this little beautiful black package of a crow. And I was like, oh, that's my perfect animal. And so that's kind of how I arrived at that place. And then it was really fortuitous because my undergraduate advisor, Dr. David Craig, was a co-author on the facial recognition study out of the University of Washington that demonstrated that crows can learn the faces of threatening people. And so then when I was like, oh, I really like crows, like I think I want to study crows, he was like, well, I have somebody to introduce you to.
I feel like that's like the crow study. Like I feel like
Yes.
if like the random person off the street, if they've heard of any study on crows, it's probably that one.
Exactly. And so then that's how I got my foot in the door with the Marsliff Lab. And then I just worked, took me a couple of years to actually get into grad school because I had to pursue my own funding, but I eventually got a really prestigious fellowship called the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship. And that's how I went to grad school.
Since you mentioned this is all in University of Washington, and you mentioned that your crow funeral work was a lot in the Seattle area, I moved to the Seattle area last year. The crow scene is different up here. It's like I drove through this area where all of a sudden there were hundreds and hundreds of crows flying around. Never seen anything like it in my life. These things are everywhere. And I live in Auburn, and they have a statue, a giant statue of a crow with fries, which is the
crow
cutest
with fries.
thing.
Yes, I've been there several times. I love that statue.
Is there something special about this area and like crows in this area? Because I'm from the Southeast, and it is so different. Like the crows are just so dense here.
Yeah. So there are some differences. So, the Seattle area is very temperate, right? So crows, you can find crows, all pretty much up and down North America, but they're only going to stay year round in places with a little bit more mild of a winter. And, that's not to say that they can't handle a harsh winter. Your listeners in Bozeman in the middle of Montana could be like, oh, we got crows here in the winter. Don't you worry about that. But I'm talking like, central northern Canada, those crows, which are there in the summer, they're going to come down for the wintertime because it gets a little too intense for them. So we get some of those birds. But we've sort of created the crow paradise in Seattle because what crows really like, as it turns out, not so different from people. So they like trees, but not too many trees. They don't want like a huge intact forest, actually. That's more raven business. They like the occasional tree, right? They like a nice neighborhood where each lot has a couple of big conifers or deciduous trees so that they can put their nest there, but then has a yard because crows are one of the few urban animals, or animals I should say at all, that can take advantage of the industrial lawn. For most wildlife, that's a dead space. And for any of your listeners who are like, what is a semi-hard but very profound thing I can do to help wildlife? Get rid of your lawn. That's like number one. Very few animals can use that, but crows can because they actually eat a lot of insects. It's a huge part of their diet. So when you see crows kind of like walking transects, maybe in your yard or in your neighborhood park, right on the grass fields, that's what they're doing, is they're looking for bugs. So they like the occasional tall tree, they like a good yard, and then they like garbage. And a regular schedule of garbage cans was just really great.
So choice. That's so good.
So choice. Something that they really learn. So the Seattle area, right, it's called the Emerald City for a reason. We have a lot of green spaces. We have a lot of trees, right? And so that's like pretty perfect. And we are ever expanding. So we're chopping down those intact forests, right, as the urban areas continue to expand and replacing them with these suburban neighborhoods. So we're creating ever more crow habitat while we do that. And so, there's other cities that model that and where crow density can be, is really, really high all across the country. But yes, you are not wrong for thinking that, especially compared to the Southeast, right, then, it's going to be a little different. And you have a different species of crow over there.
Really?
We could pivot into a slightly different question, which is, so crow, what is that? What is a crow? What is a crow? Is it different from a raven?
Where are they on the bird family tree?
Yeah. So crows and ravens and magpies, jays, so like blue jays, are all part of the Corvidae family, which is why my social media handle is corvid research with the R is very important now. That didn't used to be a thing.
Did you get a lot of typoed follows, maybe?
Yeah, I did. People were like, well, I don't understand what you're talking about.
I followed you for public health. You keep talking about crows.
You never talk about public health. I'm like, oh, yeah. That's not what I do here. So they're all in the corvid family. And then corvus is the genus. So when we think about how scientists organize animals, right, we start with very broad categories and then we narrow down where the smallest unit that we define an animal is by species. And the step above species is genus, right? So that means that animals in the same genus more closely related than animals in different genera. So crows and ravens are in the same genus called Corvus. But then when we look at species, there's actually a bunch of different species, both in the United States and all around the world. There's about 45 different species of crows and ravens.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that I thought it was just all crows. They're just crows.
No. So, and that's a really common misconception because superficially these birds look very similar, right? Most of them are just black. And so unless you're sort of looking for those differences, you may not notice that they are different birds. But in the United States, we have two different kinds of ravens. We have common ravens and Chihuahuan ravens, which you can find in the Southwest. And we have two different kinds of crows. We have the American crow, which is the most widespread. It's found coast to coast. But on the East Coast, there's also the fish crow, which goes and extends down into Florida. So that would be the one that you grew up most commonly around.
That makes sense. There's quite a few. They probably squabble a good bit with ospreys.
Yes, I'm sure that they do. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, Ellen, but did you notice at all when you moved out here? Did you ever have an inkling that the way that the crows sounded was different than what you were used to from home?
I think I did notice. I don't know if I noticed because I was just hearing it more. Like I was just hearing more crow sound. But I do feel like I noticed it mostly with seagulls. The seagulls totally different. They sound nothing alike. Like it's completely different. But yeah, I feel like there's a slightly different tone to like a crow's caw.
There is, yeah. And that's because fish crows, because they are a different species, their voices are distinct. They have a more sort of nasally, whiny, like, kind of sound versus like our Seattle crows is like a caw. That's like a classic, if you put it in a movie, you'd be like, oh, that's a crow sound.
The fish crow, to me, your impression made me think of like in the cartoons where they'd have like a little mobster character who's like, see? Like, it's Waluigi.
Yes. I'm sure people who can do, I'm not very good at my bird impressions, are going to be like, all right, it's not Waluigi, but she tried her best.
Hey y'all, this is me editing the episode, so obviously I had to look up a comparison between the calls of a fish crow and an American crow. And of course, as soon as I heard it, I was like, of course, this is the sound of my childhood crows from the Florida coast. So here is the sound of a fish crow, Corvus ossifragus. And here is the sound of an American crow, Corvus brachyrhynchos, a name which, by the way, is spelled very annoyingly with 3 H's and 2 Y's in it. Yeah, which
actually is, for people who don't identify as birds, sometimes that comes as a surprise that you can distinguish birds just based on how they sound. And so with a little bit of practice, you could be out and you can hear a bird and know what kind of bird it is just based on its voice. And that's true if it is a bird with a really distinctive song, right? We think of a lot of birds as having very beautiful songs, but it's also true for all of the other kinds of birds that don't necessarily sing. They still vocalize, and those vocalizations are going to be very species specific.
I've heard that that's a way you can tell a crow from a raven.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, ravens have a much deeper, kind of more echoey sound, more of a croak than a caw. But yeah, if you look up the differences and then just pay, next time you're out around these birds, pay attention. With just a little bit of practice, it becomes very easy to tell them apart by sound.
I still don't think I've ever actually seen a raven, because I feel like I would have noticed if I had seen one, and I feel like I haven't seen one. I think all I've seen are crows.
Yeah, it's based on where you live, that's possible. They're not going to be as established in the city as the crows are. In the Pacific Northwest, the crows have really, they occupy the urban spaces and really do a pretty good job of keeping the ravens more on the periphery. But if you go out to the coast, if you ever take a little vacation out to the Washington coast, you're going to see ravens. Or if you head to Mount Rainier for a day, do a little national park or go out to North Cascades. There's lots of places in Washington where you can, you're definitely going to be seeing ravens, but maybe not on your day-to-day commute.
Hey there, we are going to take a quick break to hear from a couple of our friends on the Maximum Fun Network. When we get back, we are getting into our ratings for American crows, so stay with us.
It's Webby season. Hi, I'm Sequoia Holmes, host of the Black People Love Paramore podcast, and we are nominated for a Webby for the episode where I interviewed Hayley Williams. In case you're unfamiliar, Black People Love Paramore is a podcast delving into the common and uncommon interests of Black people in order to help us feel more seen. We would love your vote to help us win this Webby. Please take a second and go over to the Black People Love Paramore podcast social media accounts, and you can find them at BPLP Pod across all social media platforms. Hit the link in bio and vote for Black People Love Paramore.
Hi, I'm Travis McElroy.
And I'm Teresa McElroy.
And we're the hosts of Schmanners.
If you're looking for a good place to jump into our show, we really recommend either the Playgrounds episode or the Job Interviews episode.
Or if you want to go way back, you can check out the episode where we compare the differences between afternoon tea and high tea. So check out those episodes and new episodes every Friday on Maximum Fun or wherever you get your podcasts.
If this is your first time ever listening to this podcast, we review animals by rating them out of 10 in different categories. The first category we review animals on is effectiveness, which is just physical adaptations, maybe things that are built into the animal's body that let them do a good job of the things that they're trying to do, like find food or not become food themselves. So, Kaeli, what do you give crows out of 10 for effectiveness?
Oh, they're 10 out of 10 for sure. These are just incredibly innovative animals. Yes, they are very, very good at not only adjusting to their environment, but really exploiting it in a way that a lot of other animals, a lot of other birds are just kind of making do. Right? Like your robin or your chickadee, they're happy, right? They're happy to come by your bird feeder. They probably would have rather you didn't cut down the forest, but they can make it work, right? They're doing okay. But crows are yes, we are vibing here. We can really exploit this particular type of environment.
So with a crow, I'm thinking this is, like you mentioned, a very intelligent animal. And when I think of how an animal might express or take advantage of that intelligence, what do they use? What do they have to express that? Because they don't have thumbs, right? Ooh. So not a lot to be manipulating objects with. So I guess what are their tools? What can they use?
That's a really interesting question. So they don't have thumbs, but they do have really sensitive beaks. So bird beaks aren't dead. They are made of, keratin, which is the same thing our hair and our nails are made of, but it's not completely dead tissue in that they're very sensitive. And so they can do a lot of things that would otherwise require thumbs, like with those bills. So I think my rating for that question, I'm going to have to decrease it to like a 6 out of 10. Because especially relative to a lot of other birds, think about a kiwi or a shorebird that have like these particular, we call them corpus puscules. They have these particular sensory receptors built into their bills that allow them to detect subtle movements in the sand from like a mollusk, right? Like crows don't have that. So I can't, in good faith as a bird, as an ornithologist, I can't rate them as high as like a shorebird or something like that. So that's why I got to give them like a 6 out of 10 as far as physical features on their bodies. But all birds do share that their bills are varying degrees of sensitive, and they get a lot of tactile information about their environment from their bills. And then, of course, crow feet are pretty dexterous. So I've seen one of my favorite things, when we think about birds carrying things with their feet, we often think of raptors, right? Maybe living in Washington or Florida, you saw like osprey, right, carrying their fish around, or eagles or something. But corvids do it too. And it looks a little funny when they do it, but I was fortunate enough to spend a year of my first postdoc out of graduate school studying Canada jays. Some of your listeners might know them as gray jays or whiskey jacks or camp robbers, but they're a type of corvid. And I remember I was working in Denali National Park, and we were following a banded bird around one of the campgrounds there in Denali. And it had managed to steal an entire slice of bread that a camper had turned its back on as they were making their lunch. And I can see this little bird, because they're about the same size as like a Steller's jay or a robin, flying with a whole slice of bread in its foot. And, a robin could never. So I gotta give the corvids, they have impressively powerful feet. They have incredible eyesight. They're not like raptors, but they can definitely, if you have crows that you feed, that crow can get all the way down the block. And as soon as it sees you, boom, it's going to be coming right your direction. So they have very good eyesight, those tactile bills, and the kind of surprisingly powerful feet. But still, relative to some of the other birds, I got to give them a 6 out of 10 for physical adaptations.
Purely, I suppose, ceremonially, just a mere technicality, I do have to ask what you would give crows out of 10 for ingenuity, because that is one of the categories that we rate animals on, which is just behavior, like you've been talking about, intelligence, ways they solve problems. I do have to ask you what you would give them out of 10. I feel like I know what you're going to say, though. Definitely 10 out of 10. So one of the really interesting things about crows is, and there's whole papers that have been written about this, they're kind of paradoxical in that, on the one hand, crows are, and especially ravens, notoriously neophobic. And that means that they are scared of new things. Don't like that thing.
Yeah, they don't like that thing. So people who feed them regularly may have experienced this, where like maybe they have a place on their porch, and every day they feed them, the crows come in, and one day they pressure wash their porch, and they leave the pressure washer out there, and all of a sudden the crows are like really nervous to come down to the porch. And it's just because there's this like new thing out there. The paradox is that how does an animal that is so scared of change in its environment do well in an urban environment, which is in constant change, right? And so the best answer that we've come up with is that because crows are these incredibly social animals, and despite the fact that they do have this neophobia, particularly in group settings where you have animals occupying a variety of social statuses, you're going to have animals that are going to be more willing to take risks than some of the other ones. And so what that means is if you're an individual that has the luxury, because you're really healthy or you're really in good condition, of being really risk averse, you can just kind of wait around for that bird that's already had to take that risk, maybe because it was a little bit more desperate. You can wait for that bird to show you that that thing is okay. So in that way, being social is kind of its own tool where you can learn so much about the environment around you in a safe way because you get to just wait for a demonstrator, for a more knowledgeable bird to come along and show you what is or isn't dangerous.
It's waiting for somebody to take the first slice of pizza at the party.
Exactly. So I'll never forget so when I was doing my funeral studies, the way that looked was I would set my experiment up near a nesting pair because I did it during the breeding season. So I do it a controlled distance away from the nest tree every time. And, eventually, because these experiments went on over the course of many weeks, the nest would succeed, right? And the kids would leave and they'd be flying around and they'd be in the area. But I would still be coming back every week, putting food out and looking for how the crows had changed. Because the question we were asking in that funeral experiment was, are crows using funerals to learn about danger? And is that in the context of the place? Can they learn that a place is dangerous because they've seen a dead crow there? And can they learn that a person is maybe a predator based on seeing them handling a dead crow? And a person they've never seen before, if they see that person holding a dead crow, are they like, oh no, like you must be a predator.
They've returned to the scene of the crime.
Yeah, like you must be a predator. I'm going to memorize you. So if I ever see you again, I know to alert everybody because you are a crow killer. And so I would go out and I would feed the crows, and then we would have our funeral day. And then I would keep feeding the crows. And that's how I tried to gauge, are they learning that a place is dangerous? Because maybe before, when they saw those Cheetos and peanuts, they would come down right away because I love Cheetos and peanuts.
Same.
Yeah, right? But then after, would they continue to do that or would they be more nervous? And what we found is that they're more nervous. And then the other thing we looked at is those people. So the person that they saw holding the dead crow, if they came back once a week for 6 weeks, would they notice them and treat them like predators? And so for one of my sites, I'll never forget, it had been, 6 weeks in. So my person was there, the food, but we always put the food down. And so the parents knew, they saw that person and they were like, this person is no good. So they were up in the trees scolding, rah, rah, rah. But the kids don't, they don't know as much as their parents because they're new in the world, right? And so they have to learn all of these things still. So the kids see these Cheetos. And again, by kids, I'm talking baby crows. They see these Cheetos and they're like, well, those look pretty good. I may not know much, but I know that Cheetos are good.
If there's two demographics that are going to go to town on some Cheetos, it's kids and crows. So I can imagine.
Right. So the kids are wandering up to the food pile. Meanwhile, the crow parents are in the trees, like, rah, 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 cawing, no. They won't come near the Cheeto pile because that scary person is there. But the kids are like, I think I'm going to go for it. And it goes and it gets a Cheeto. And it starts wandering away, and only when it gets about a few meters away, the parent comes down, takes the Cheeto from the kid, and goes and eats it. So they're like, look, I told you shouldn't do that, but since you did, I actually would like that Cheeto, and I will take the Cheeto. Actually, I will be taking it. Actually, so yeah, so they have one of their tools again is the power of being in a social group. And taking advantage of that in metaphorical or sometimes quite literal ways.
When we lived in Florida, we lived in this pretty straightforward suburban neighborhood. Lots of, sort of copied and pasted houses with yards and such. And an HOA, boo.
Oh, yeah. Why do those exist anymore?
It's the worst.
Animals don't have HOAs. I think that should teach us something. Yeah.
We should embrace. Yeah, we should not have that. But so I, started noticing there was this murder of crows that would hang out in our neighborhood all the time. And one day I noticed tons of crows in one person's yard. And they were just all hanging out in this one yard. I was like, oh, maybe there's something out there. Go out later that day. I'm walking out and I notice in my yard, in a very weird spot, is a pizza crust. And I'm like, that's a really weird place for there to be a pizza crust. We haven't had pizza recently. It's not ours. I don't know where this pizza crust came from. Keep walking down the street, and I realize what all those crows were doing in my neighbor's yard, because there were pizza crusts torn into little pieces and like deliberately placed all around the yard. It was like I saw one of the crows kind of hopping around, and it would like pick up a pizza crust and like move it somewhere else and then put it down. Like it looked like it was like decorating. It was like very meticulously placing the pizza crust, like arranging them in a certain way. And I was like, oh, they were just, I guess, playing with pizza crusts.
Yeah. So that is a great observation. And what you saw them do is called caching, which is when animals store food or other items, but mostly always food, for later use. So crows will often, how you'll see them do it, is they'll have, some food source and they can't eat it all in one sitting, or maybe they just don't want to. And they'll go and they'll often kind of like pull out a tuft of grass from a yard, and then they stick the food in there, and then they cover it with the tuft of grass. They'll put them in flower pots, gutters, right? So, if you ever find Cheetos or like weird food items in your, when it's time to clean out your gutters, or you have peanuts sprouting from your flower pots and you think to yourself, I didn't plant peanuts, you'll know who's to blame. And crows so we can group animals into either being what we call obligate cachers or facultative cachers. So what obligate cachers mean, it's an animal that has to hide food for later because there's not going to be enough food later in the year for it to eat. So these are usually animals that live in places with harsh winter environments. Squirrels, right? So pine squirrels, wolverines, Canada jays, those are all animals that have to make food stores in order to be able to live off them for the wintertime. The other category is called facultative or opportunistic cachers. They're animals that are like, there's too much for me to eat here. I'm going to hide this for later. But you know what? If I don't actually find it later, it doesn't matter so much. There's lots of food around, which is why then so much of this stuff that they squirrel or crow, I should say crow away in people's yards, you find later because they never actually come back for it.
That's going in the inventory. That's a surprise tool that'll help us later.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, there's pizza crust everywhere.
Little pizza crust garden. As a cacher, especially as a social cacher, one of the things that you have to balance is like, if you're caching in a group where other individuals are watching you, they might steal your food. And so you want to, you don't want to bury things in really big pieces in one place, because then if it gets found out, you could lose all of your food at once. Now, some animals do what we call hoard caching. So things like pine squirrels, for example, they have these big middens. They have everything in one place, and they really fiercely protect that. Acorn woodpeckers, another example. If your listeners want to Google like acorn woodpecker larder, they just have these trees. Picture this tree, and every inch of that tree, there's just another acorn. It kind of looks like a cribbage board almost, of like acorns in the side of a tree.
Don't Google it if you struggle with trypophobia or trypophobia. If you're weirded out by like clusters of small holes, do not Google it.
That's true. That's a very good warning. So some animals do hoard like that, but crows don't, because that social dynamic means that they would be at very high risk of losing everything at once. So they like to tear things in little pieces, and like you say, they're very meticulous about it. I think one of the cutest. I love watching them cache. There's something very adorable about the way that they go about it.
They're so particular.
One of my favorite memories was, this was in the springtime, so the flowers were in bloom. I watched a crow cache in a flower pot, like at a Whole Foods, and found something. And then it kind of shoves it into the dirt of this flower pot. And then it picked one of the big pansies that was in bloom and like put it right on top of the cache. I just loved
joking.
That. I was like,
my
oh, God.
Oh, to be a crow picking a flower.
You hide your dirty French fry you found. You're so excited about. It's the best day of its life. It's just like, yes.
A dirty French fry, but topped with a single flower.
Exactly.
You could serve that at like a really fancy restaurant. If like get a Michelin star for crow meal. It's crow dinner.
Crow dinner.
Dirty French fry topped with flour.
Dirty French fry topped with flour. Exactly.
This is an extremely adorable mental image because imagining any bird holding a flower is great, but like the crow holding a flower, very goth, very adorable. This brings us to aesthetics. This is the last category we rate animals on. How much you like looking at this animal, whether it's cute, pretty, cool, however you feel about it. What do you give crows out of 10 for aesthetics?
I'm going to give crows a 9 out of 10.
That's good.
Again, I know my crow fans are probably going to be like, oh, betrayal, because I didn't give them 10 out of 10. But like, I have had the good fortune of traveling many places and seeing many birds, and you just can't see like a fire-throated hummingbird. And then, you know, it's just like, we gotta have those reservations, I think, for some of the birds whose whole vibe, they've poured their entire life's work into their aesthetics. You gotta leave the 10 out of 10s for them, because otherwise, what's it all for? Crows, on the other hand, they are naturally very beautiful, but it's not their life's work. So, you know, I just, out of respect for the flame bowerbirds and the fire-throated hummingbirds of the world, I think we gotta tamp it down a little bit for the crows.
We need to leave room for growth.
Exactly. But they are very beautiful, and they are much more colorful, actually, than a lot of people give them credit for, because actually, not unlike the color-shifting feathers on the throat of an Anna's hummingbird, crows are iridescent.
Love it. It's my favorite thing in the world. Get so hyped for iridescence.
They have a very modest level of iridescence, and more so actually with, I think, ravens than crows, which gives them these beautiful blue, purple, sometimes even slightly green sheens. Now, they're not as iridescent as, say, a grackle. So folks who live around grackles will know or blackbirds, like brewers' blackbirds, right? Classic Costco parking lot bird. But if you see those birds in the light, you are like, oh my gosh, wow, they're like brilliant. With crows and ravens, it's a little bit more subtle, but again, that's actually part of why I rate them so highly, because, you know, it's like that just very sort of effortless minimalist beauty where you know, when you see it, you're like, oh wow, I wasn't really expecting that on you, but like, it's very nice. And the like ravens with their hackle feathers. So that's one of the ways that you can tell ravens and crows apart, is ravens have these elongated throat feathers called hackles. It just gives them this very sort of authoritative, regal kind of look to them.
It's like a mane, but like upside down.
Exactly. But crows, they can also, you know, because they're so curious and they're so attentive to people, you catch these looks sometimes that are so curious. And I don't know, there's just something there where, you know, as part of this rating, is not necessarily purely beauty, but it could also just be the vibes and the cuteness. And so crows get a pretty high rating for that too, because they have these very actually sweet faces when you really look at them, and they give you that kind of like cocked head. You just see this like sweetness there that sometimes you don't, because so much of their personality is shining through, right? Some animals, you look at them and you don't necessarily get a read of that personality super easily. There's not necessarily a lot happening behind those eyes. That's easy for a person to connect with. Doesn't mean that there's not, you know, amongst themselves happening a lot behind there, but maybe there's a little bit of more of a barrier for a person to connect with that. But with crows, that connection happens really easily. And so there's just so much personality that you can get out of their faces.
They're expressing a lot. It feels like they're saying a lot.
Which is really impressive because, you know, their facial muscles don't move like ours do. They actually are quite literally not expressive in that way. And yet, you still get that when you look at them, which again, I think actually speaks more to just how expressive they are. Because unlike a dog or a person, you know, who can shift our eyebrows, really shift our mouths to say different things and tell the world how we're feeling, crows don't have that as much, though they can kind of articulate their feathers, right? They puff them out, they sleek them down, and that is a really important way that birds tell each other how they're feeling. And that we can learn how to assess how they're feeling. But, you know, not quite the same as having like eyebrows that you can knit together or raise up to, you know, tell somebody exactly how you're feeling.
Give birds eyebrows.
Yes.
We should be working on this. You've seen those little videos where people edit little stick figure arms over birds. Give them little eyebrows.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like if we did, honestly, most of the time they'd be like, be so kind of like mad. They'd be mad. You got to picture like a chickadee, probably if it had eyebrows. Most of the time it would just be like,
Mostly mad.
Mostly mad.
Is there any known particular reason why they're black? Is that like a thing that helps them in any way, or is it just the way they ended up?
It's mostly a way that they ended up based on, so we believe that the earliest versions of corvid way back in the evolutionary history were a dark colored bird. And so it just wasn't to their advantage to move out of that color scheme the way that it clearly was to the advantage of many of the world's jays, for example, which can be very, very colorful. You know, being a dark color is often helpful in climates with a lot of sun exposure, especially with birds, because the sun is very harsh on feathers. So having very high melanin content in your feathers is very important for sun protection. But, you know, why the crow in Seattle is to this day black has more probably to do with just that evolutionary history and there not being a selective force to diverge away from that color palette. Versus these other instances of corvids around the world, there was a selective force to speciate in that way, and it affected their plumage.
It wasn't broke, so they weren't fixing it.
Exactly.
Kaeli, I cannot thank you enough. This has been an amazing time. Before we hop off for today, I would love it if you could let our friends listening know where they can find you. Like, where should people go next? Where they can follow you either on social media, online, if there's any projects that you're working on right now that you really want people to know about. Where can people go when they're done listening to this?
Sure. So despite the fact that my professional focus has pivoted, my personal focus, as always, has remained true to crows. And so that's still almost entirely what I spend my social media time doing. So if people want more opportunities to learn about crows or ask me questions about crows, they can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, at the Corvid Research handle. I used to be really active on Twitter, but I've pulled back a little bit, which I don't think I have to explain. I think viewers will probably, or listeners will probably know based on the fact I called it Twitter, what happened there. But I am still there, so you can find me. And then I have a blog, corvidresearch.blog. So if you just put Corvid Research in your Google handbar, you can find me, and whatever sort of platform you use, I will be there. But I'm the most active on TikTok and Instagram right at this moment.
And I will have links to everything in the episode description so people can just scroll down and click on through.
The other place people can see my little fingerprints a bit is if they want to learn more about the Tinian monarch, or this kind of little known area of the world that I live in called the Mariana Islands, and the really incredible wildlife. I encourage them to look for the Marianas Nature handle on Instagram, where I post a lot of my underwater photos. Monarch, it's a collaborative space, so it's, not just my content. I would encourage folks to just check out that page. It's a great opportunity to maybe learn about a community of critters that you've never heard of or come across, and just diversify your feed a little bit. So feel free to go ahead and check that out too.
It's pretty choice. There's some really cool little critters on here. I think I see a sea slug. It's good stuff.
Yes.
This is good content, y'all.
In my other life, I would have been a nudibranch scientist, because as it turns out, I love a nudibranch. So a lot of my underwater photos make it into that feed. Yeah, if you don't know about nudibranchs already, you're in for a treat.
I wish I could wipe my brain clean of everything I know about nudibranchs so I could experience learning about them all over again.
Yeah.
Well, Kaeli, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge. I've had so much fun learning with you. We will talk to you later. Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you found learning more about crows to be a good cause. If you liked what you heard, I hope you leave behind some kind words for us and a review on your podcast app of choice, like Anonymous Magnet Beast, who said, quote, "It's so chill, very informative, cute, and funny. Both Ellen's and Christian's voices are relaxing, and I love their dynamic. They deliver well thought out and fun info about all kinds of quirky animals. Plus, the cover art and theme song are adorable. Keep up the good work." I super appreciate these kind words. Thank you so much for saying this. It means a lot to me. And also, we don't usually say this on the podcast, but our cover art is by my very talented friend, Taylor Gordon Wood, who posts on Instagram under the name Mrs.Brainbow. So go check them out to see more of their work. If you want to hang out with us online, we are on Facebook, Instagram, Discord, and TikTok. Links to everything will be in the episode description. You can also send me an email at ellen@justthezooofus.com if you have a cool animal you would like to hear us talk about on the show. We would also like to thank Maximum Fun for having us on their network alongside their other amazing shows like the ones that you heard promos for here today. You can go check those out and learn more about the network and how you can be a part of supporting our show over at MaximumFun.org. Finally, we would like to thank Louis Zong for our theme music. That's all for today. We'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.
MaximumFun.org.
Comedy and culture.
Artist owned. Audience supported.